In 1879, a 16-year-old boy left his father's farm bound for Detroit at a time when the only means of transportation were trains or horse carriages, and the first automobiles were seen as racing machines for the rich. 35 years later, after his arrival in Detroit, half of all the cars on earth were carrying his name. And that boy Henry Ford would become one of the wealthiest men in American history. At the age of 12, his father gifted him a pocket watch, and he learned how to take it apart and put it back together in a matter of minutes. He later gained a reputation as a watch repairman and began fixing watches for people in the neighborhood. When Henry turned, he was 14 years old. When Henry was 10 years old, he came across a steam engine for the first time in his life during a school trip to Detroit. And that's when his passion for mechanics became an obsession. By the time he was 15, he had constructed his first steam engine, but his life took a turn when he lost his mother, Mary Ford, to a sudden illness. Against the wishes of his father, Henry packed his things and left the village in search of a new direction in life. In 1882, when he turned 19, Henry Ford decided to return home to Michigan, where he had been born and raised in the town of Detroit. After being unemployed for some time, he found a job as an apprentice at the James Flower and Brothers machine shop, where he earned $2.60 per week, but it wasn't enough to cover his rent, so Henry made good use of his childhood obsession by working nights as a jeweler, cleaning and repairing machines. In the year 1885, Henry met Clara Jane Grant at a New Year's Eve party and got engaged the following year as a wedding in 1885, and they were married the next year. Henry's job was to traveling throughout southern Michigan, setting up and servicing Westinghouse's steam tractor engines. In 1887, his father had purchased a portable steam engine which he used to power his farm machinery. Henry became so good with it that a neighbor paid him $3 to operate his steam engine for him. Word of his talent spread across Michigan. Word of Henry's talent reached the district representative of the Westinghouse Engine Company. In 1891, Henry's father gave his son 40 acres of land, but rather than turning it into a farmland, Henry had other ideas. He fell in love with the gas engine and found someone in Detroit who owned one. The gas engines were much more efficient than steam engines and didn't need 30 minutes to start up because they were powered by an electric spark instead of an internal combustion engine. Edsel Bryant Ford was fascinated by electricity and wanted to learn more about it, so he applied for work as a night engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company in Detroit. The company was the biggest electric company in Detroit, and it was generating electricity to 1,000 homes in the city using a steam engine, so this made Henry more than qualified to work there. His job was to primarily fix the engine whenever it broke or had a fault. In 1896, Henry completed his first working gas engine, which was the first step in his dream of creating a horseless carriage. Henry's car had two gears, and neither one was for going in reverse or going forward, but the biggest problem was that it had no cooling system, and so the car was pronto overheating after running for a while. In 1899, Henry began to build his second experimental car and completed it by July 1899. This new car was larger, sturdier, and heavier than the previous one. He took a wealthy lumber merchant by the name of William Murphy for a test drive in his new vehicle. By the time the test drive was finished, William wanted to be part of Henry's business venture, and on August 5, 1899, the Detroit Automobile Company was born. Henry Ford was fired from the Detroit Automobile Company. A year later, Ford's newly designed racing car defeated the vehicle of Cleveland automaker Alexander Winton, as well as the nation's leading national racing driver Grosse Pointe. His 26-horsepower vehicle became the talk of the town, and that kind of popularity gave investors the confidence they needed to back Henry. The second time, the result was the birth of the Ford Motor Company with Henry as the chief engineer. Henry Leland followed the wishes of his investors and went on to create what today we know as the Cadillac, with Henry Ford on the name of the company was changed from Ford Motor Company to the Cadillac Motor Company. In 1902, Henry produced Ford 999, an 80-horsepower car that was driven by Barney Oldfield, a former bicycle racer who had never driven an automobile in his life, surpassing Lincoln's car again by 1904. Ford made over 20 cars before he got one that worked, but it wasn't until 1906 when the production of the Model N would really first make use of the assembly line. In 1904, Henry raised more money and built his own factory. He employed over 300 workers and began experimenting with the assembly line inside his new factory. Around this time, Henry also discovered vanadium steel, and it was this discovery that really paved the way to a new era for the automobile industry. Henry Ford dreamed of making automobiles for the common man and for everyday use, and the Model T was the answer to that dream. When it was first released, it was one of the most expensive cars Henry had ever made. The Despite its price, it quickly became a fan favorite in the use. In a matter of days after its release, 15,000 orders were placed, and Ford Motor Company soon became the Ford Motor Company. Henry realized he needed a bigger factory to produce over 100 models a day. And so in 1910 he built a new plant in Highland Park, Michigan. After several experiments, the assembly line was officially in working order by 1913. This allowed work to be taken to the workers rather than the workers moving it and around the vehicle. The vehicle was pulled down the line, building it step by step, and the new process reduced the time of production from 12 hours to 90 minutes. By 1914, their production rate of over 300 vehicles was more than all the cars produced by other car manufacturers combined. By 1916, the price of the Model T that once sold for $850 was nosing for less than $400, but that wasn't the only brilliant strategy Henry adopted. Many companies laughed at this move, believing it would quickly bankrupt the company. But it did the opposite, and mechanics from all over the country flew to Detroit in search of higher wages. Ford had changed the business and manufacturing world across the US. There is one rule for the industrialist, and that is make the best quality goods possible at the lowest cost possible, paying the lowest price possible. The new model allowed Ford to hire a new set of mechanics for a third shift and change the hours they were required to work. In 1919, Henry Ford grew tired of the interference from other investors in the company and decided to buy them all out. This made him the sole owner of the largest automobile company in the world. He continued to believe the Model T was the car most people wanted, hated the growing popularity of the more expensive but stylish and comfortable cars like Chevrolet. By the late 1920s, Henry could no longer ignore the declining sales figures, so he decided to shut down the Model T assembly line and design an all-new car. In the 1930s, Ford Motors Company was struggling to compete in a very competitive market. And with the rise of the Great Depression, Ford was forced to lay off workers and lower his rates. In 1939, Ford's son died of stomach cancer, and so he kept running the company for 2 more years before handing over control to his grandson Henry A. Henry. He later died of a cerebral hemorrhage on April 7, 1947 at the age of 72. Today, Ford Motors Company owns a market cap of around $70 billion and remains as one of the biggest car companies in the world.